So temptation, right? Jesus is brought into the wilderness to be tempted. If you and I were brought into the wilderness to be tempted, what would we be tempted with? It's always dangerous, right? Especially if you're sitting next to your spouse, like adultery. I'm tempted. Got to be careful with these answers, I think. But nonetheless, temptations, right? I would say adultery is not a temptation, except it happens all the time. So that's obviously a temptation. But think about it. Temptation. What are some temptations? Just here we go. This is the congregation participation part. Just what are some things that we're tempted to do? Don't think. Laziness. Laziness is temptation, sure. Greed, right? Theft, yeah, stealing ice cream. Right? Yeah, right. These are the things we're tempted. I guess you could probably go down like the 7 deadly sins, right? You've got greed, you've got sloth, it's like the 7 dwarfs. I can only ever remember 6 at a given time. But you get the idea, right? These are the things that when we think of temptation, like if I'm off in the wilderness, that I'm going to be tempted with, or chocolate, right? Those are the things. Those are not the things Jesus was tempted with at all. We don't read in this gospel what Jesus was tempted with, but we read about it in Matthew. So I want to read for you the things that he is tempted with. The tempter says to him, if you are the Son of God, keep in mind he's been in the woods for 40 days. The tempter said to him, if you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread. He's tempted to not trust God and provide for himself. In the next one, he's put on the pinnacle of the temple, and the tempter says, if you're the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written that God will take care of you. He's tempted to put God to the test, right? And not trust God. Then in the next one, he's taken to a very high mountain, showed all the kingdoms of the world, and said, all these I give you if you will fall down and worship me. And that's really the summation of it all, right? In all 3, really what he's tempted to do is put something above God. Which gets a little hairy, I think, for us, because, Jesus is God. So, if Jesus is God, how can Jesus put something above God? It's a little confusing. But let's remember that a big part of Jesus' life is submitting to God's will, right? And when we read at the end of his life on earth, when he's in the garden, what is he praying for? He's praying, take this cup away from me, but not my will, your will. And if you don't think that Jesus, hanging on the cross, was tempted to ignore God's will, I've got news for you. I'm pretty sure it was a pretty big temptation for him. Remember that movie? You don't. Like 30 years ago, The Last Temptation of Christ. People hated that movie. But it was an interesting concept because it was like, what if Jesus decided to not do it? Jesus would have been tempted and was tempted to do things his way, not the Father's way. That was what he was tempted with. Now, Martin Luther said something very interesting and very confusing. And we talked about this a little bit in Bible study today. What Luther said was that all sins are violations of the first commandment. First commandment is, I am the Lord your God, you shall have no other gods before me. And Luther said that every sin is a violation of that commandment because everything comes from that. If God says don't lie and you lie, who are you listening to? You're listening to yourself and not God. You're saying, I know better than you, God. I'm going to do this. You're saying, I know what's right here, God. I'm going to do this. If God says don't steal and I steal, I'm saying to God, I know better than you, God. I deserve this. I know better than you, God. I should have this. I know better than you, God. So I'm not going to listen to you. Luther said that every sin is a violation of the first commandment. And so when we look at the temptation that Jesus goes through, that's all it is. And when we look at temptation in our own lives, that's really all it is. When you and I make decisions on a day-to-day basis about whether or not to take out the free ice cream, the question is, has God given me enough? Or do I need more? It's the first commandment. When you and I have a job opportunity and we're weighing the pluses and the minuses, what are we really asking? If I'm going to make this decision, I'm saying, God, I know better than you. But if I turn it over to God, then I'm following the first commandment. See, it's not just that the commandments, right? That commandments, whatever, it depends on how you count. There's different ways to count the commandments. It's very confusing. But the later commandments, it's not just that violating those violates the first commandment. Sometimes in life, we have to make decisions between two good things, don't we? I mean, that's kind of my life. I don't know about your life. I don't have a whole heck of a lot gone wrong. My issue is blessing management. I have so many good things that I have to pick and choose whether I want to hang out with these people or those people, whether I want to go do this thing or that thing. My problem is I got too much good stuff. Which one does God want me to do? That's the question. And following that will determine whether or not I follow the first commandment or not. Temptation is all about the first commandment. And we as a church need to be asking ourselves, what does God want as well? I mean, we want to grow. We are trying to grow. How do we grow? What do we do? How do we make that work? Well, there's a lot of great ideas. We've been throwing some books around in counsel and evangelism, and there's good stuff in there. We could spend like years doing just one of those books, and we've already read several of them. Which one are we supposed to do? Which choices are we supposed to make? What direction are we supposed to go? Well, we're not supposed to figure that out. We're supposed to figure out which direction God wants us to go. As individuals and as a church, for you and I, the question is not what do I think. The question is never what do I want. The question is what does God want? Following God is not something we do on Tuesday afternoon and then forget about it Wednesday morning. It is not something we do on Thursday when we're trying to figure out what's on TV and forget about on Friday when it's time to figure out what's for breakfast. It's not something we remember on a Friday night, which is actually a Thursday, at a Kroger, which is actually a Publix, when we could get free ice cream. That's really stealing. Figuring out what God wants us to do is not something that we do sometimes. It is the only thing we ever do at any time. Amen.